My name is Alira Vance, and I never imagined that one day I'd bring down the very company I once dreamed of building my future in. I was 31 when the whole thing started. A project manager at Virexa Solutions, one of those rising tech consulting firms that branded itself as innovative but ran on the exhausted backs of underpaid staff. I had climbed my way up from intern to team lead in under 5 years. Not because I was brilliant, though I'm no slouch, but because I worked harder than anyone else. I stayed late, covered for absent coworkers, and took on last-minute client calls at ungodly hours just to prove my worth. I wasn't from money. No Ivy League degrees. Just grit, long nights, and a stubborn streak as wide as Texas. My mother used to say I had the fire of 1,000 ancestors in me, never knew if that was pride or a warning. I joined Virexa because it promised growth and equity. But what I got was exploitation masked as opportunity. And the man behind all that false glitter? Darren Cray. Darren was my direct supervisor. Slick suit, bleached white smile, and a management style straight out of a narcissist's handbook. He loved to host meetings just to hear himself talk. Loved buzzwords like synergy and grind culture. He claimed we were a family, which was rich, considering he laid off 2 people after they returned from bereavement leave. But I kept my head down and played along, until the night I finally said no. It was a Friday evening in mid-November. We had just wrapped a brutal product rollout. My team and I had worked nearly 60-hour weeks for 3 straight weeks, chasing a deadline Darren had agreed to without consulting any of us. When it finally launched, I expected, at minimum, a day to breathe. Instead, at 6:47 p.m., long after most people had left, Darren strolled into my office like he owned the air I breathed. "Alira," he said, "need you to stay this weekend. The board's flying in Monday and I want to prep a new pitch deck. You're the only one I trust to polish it." I blinked at him. "This weekend?" He grinned. "Just a couple hours Saturday and Sunday. Maybe 10 hours total. But don't log it, I'd rather not mess with payroll this late in Q4. You get it, right?" That was the moment. I remember feeling the shift. Like a pin had dropped inside me. I was tired, not just physically, but emotionally. Drained from years of trying to prove myself to people who saw me as nothing but a convenience. "No," I said. His smile cracked. "Sorry?" I sat back. "I'm not working overtime this weekend. Not unpaid. And not after the last 3 weeks we just had." The silence in that room could have sucked the air out of a skyscraper. "Alira," he said, his voice cooling, "I've gone to bat for you more times than I can count. Don't be ungrateful." "Ungrateful?" I laughed, low and sharp. "You mean doing 3 people's jobs and still being one of the lowest paid managers here? That kind of gratitude?" He stared at me for a moment like he was recalibrating. Then came the phrase I'll never forget, "Well, maybe this just isn't the place for you anymore." Just like that. He fired me the following Monday. No write-ups, no HR process, just a brief email saying I was being let go due to performance misalignment. The same email CC'd the entire management chain. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I walked out of Virexa with my head held high and my dignity intact. But Darren made a mistake. He thought firing me was the end. He didn't realize I had spent the last 5 years building real relationships. That people on the inside were already fed up with his hypocrisy and power games. He didn't know how much his team resented him, but I did. And I was about to turn every single one of them against him. One conversation at a time. The day after I was fired, I sat on my small apartment balcony with a lukewarm cup of coffee and a mind racing faster than my heartbeat. I should have been scared. I had bills, no severance, and a reputation on the line in a tight-knit industry. But instead of fear, I felt something else, purpose. Darren hadn't just insulted me, he'd opened the floodgates. I'd seen enough during my time at Virexa to know I wasn't alone. People were tired. Burned out. Angry. And Darren? He ruled with fear and favoritism. That house of cards was begging to collapse. I just needed the right wind to blow it down. By Wednesday, I had a plan. Not a dramatic one. Not a grand scene where I burst into the office with a flash drive full of dirt. No, Darren was too careful for that. He covered his tracks. Never sent a controversial email. Always made his orders verbally. HR? Useless, they were his lapdogs. So I decided to play the long game. I started with Lisa. Lisa Moretti was a UX designer on my old team. A quiet genius who kept her head low but saw everything. She messaged me on LinkedIn a day after I got fired. Lisa M., I just saw the email. What the hell happened? Please tell me you're okay. I replied casually, thanked her, and asked if she had time for coffee. She agreed, and the next morning, we met at a cafe downtown. Her eyes were tired, her voice lower than usual. I'm still in shock, she said, stirring her tea. Everyone is. People are scared. Scared of Darren? She nodded. He's got everyone on edge. Since you left, he's been worse. Micromanaging. Adding work without warning. Yesterday he made Tom redo a whole prototype because the font wasn't bold enough. He's spiraling. I leaned in. Lisa. I want to do something about it. But I can't do it alone. She blinked. What do you mean? I mean, document everything. Every extra hour he demands. Every unreasonable task. If enough people collect proof, eventually the board won't be able to ignore it. I'm not talking about a witch hunt, I'm talking about accountability. Lisa was quiet for a moment. Then she pulled out her phone. You're not the only one who's been taking notes, she said, smiling for the first time. That was the first spark. Over the next 3 weeks, I reconnected with nearly every person who had once reported to me. I wasn't pushy. I didn't ask for loyalty. I just listened. And I heard the same story over and over again. He guilt trips us into working weekends, but logs his own hours as PTO. He took credit for the client deck I built from scratch. He told Sarah to be more likable in meetings or she'd never be promoted. He's still using that slush fund from last quarter, nobody's audited it yet. It was like opening a rotten fruit and finding worms inside. I started organizing the information. Not to go public, yet, but to create a clear, undeniable picture of Darren's behavior. The final piece came from someone I never expected, Priya Varma. She was Virex's senior compliance analyst. We had spoken maybe 3 times in the past year. But one evening, she called me. Not messaged, called. Alira, she said, I'm not supposed to say this, but I saw your name on the dismissal log. There was no HR record. That firing wasn't legal. I let the silence hang. I don't want to be involved, she added quickly. But, if someone were to file a formal grievance and have corroboration from the team, the board would have to review it. Especially with what we just paid out for that gender discrimination case last quarter. That was the crack I needed. All I had to do now was widen it. So I wrote a letter. Not to HR. Not to the board. To my former team. It was honest. Direct. I explained why I had been fired. I included a few choice quotes from Darren, nothing confidential, just enough to jog memories. And I asked them to consider what their silence was costing them. I closed with this, *, you don't owe me anything. But you owe yourselves better. No one should have to choose between a paycheck and their dignity. *, I signed it and asked Lisa to circulate it quietly. By Friday, half the floor had read it. By the following Tuesday, Darren called an emergency meeting to reaffirm leadership structure and transparency. But it was too late. The quiet rebellion had already begun. And I was just getting started. The thing about narcissists is they don't believe consequences apply to them, until they do. And Darren Cray was the kind of man who had skated through his entire career on charisma, buzzwords, and backroom handshakes. He never saw the storm coming, even when it was already pouring. The week after my letter made its quiet rounds through Varex's office, I watched from the sidelines as the first cracks began to show. I had former team members texting me daily with updates. Lisa, he called a meeting about loyalty. Said anyone leaking company info would be terminated. People just stared at him. Jules, a junior dev, he made Sarah cry today. She said no to staying late and he humiliated her in front of everyone. Tom, marketing lead, there's tension in every room. People are whispering during breaks. Nobody trusts anyone. It's chaos. Darren tried to tighten his grip. That's what weak leaders do when they feel control slipping, they clamp down harder. He started holding daily check-ins, demanding status updates at ridiculous hours, and sending 2 a.m. emails that read like threats masked as urgent requests. But it was already too late. What Darren didn't know, what he couldn't possibly have guessed, was that the people he'd walked on for years were finally done tiptoeing. And I wasn't just watching anymore. I was organizing. Using a burner email and encrypted docs, I helped Lisa and Tom set up a shared folder where team members could anonymously upload screenshots, timesheets, Slack messages, anything that proved a pattern of verbal abuse, forced unpaid overtime, harassment, or misappropriation of budget. Within a week, the folder had over 60 entries. It was a goldmine. There were timestamps showing weekend work logged under voluntary hours, a clear payroll violation. A voice memo from Darren ranting about a client while calling one of the interns a liability with breasts. Spreadsheets showing that Darren had reallocated budget funds into miscellaneous marketing but used them for what appeared to be personal travel. But the final nail? That came from someone I never expected. Jake Rowan. Jake had been Darren's favorite. The so-called golden boy. Sharp suit, MBA from Dartmouth, always eager to please. I assumed he'd never turn on Darren. But then, one afternoon, he messaged me from his personal account. Jake R., I know what you're doing. You're not wrong. I want in. We met for lunch 2 days later. He looked different, nervous, pale. Not the confident guy I remembered. I thought siding with him would help my career, he admitted, eyes down. But now, it's toxic. He's drowning the entire floor in paranoia. He's sloppy. He's angry. And the board's starting to whisper. I stared at him. You're close to him. You still have access. He nodded. Which is why I brought this. Jake slid a USB across the table. On it were 3 things: a spreadsheet detailing falsified performance reviews. Darren had downgraded evaluations for employees who'd challenged him, making them ineligible for bonuses or promotions. A copy of an email chain where Darren doctored client satisfaction numbers before the last board review. A draft email Darren had written, addressed to HR, falsely accusing Lisa of toxic insubordination, an attempt to get her fired after she pushed back on a project scope. My heart pounded. With this, we had everything. Now came the question, how do we make it count? We couldn't just dump the information publicly, it could backfire, even be dismissed as a disgruntled former employee's vendetta. We needed someone inside who had credibility. Someone who could package it properly and deliver it with impact. Jake volunteered. I'll present it anonymously, he said. There's a board ethics hotline. If I forward everything with timestamps, links, and documents, it'll force a compliance investigation. I hesitated. You'll risk your job. Jake gave me a tired smile. Not if I position it right. Besides, I'd rather burn a bridge than keep walking on one that's collapsing. And so we did it. 3 days later, the board received an anonymous packet, tightly formatted, impeccably organized, and full of undeniable proof that Darren Cray had been violating both internal policies and federal labor laws. They didn't reply, of course. Not to Jake. Not to anyone. But we heard the whisper ripple within 24 hours. Darren canceled 2 meetings in one afternoon. His calendar went mysteriously blank the following Monday. He stopped calling surprise check-ins. People said he looked rattled, like someone who'd just found a ticking bomb in his desk drawer. Then the board called a closed-door meeting. No one knew what was discussed, but we didn't have to wait long for the fallout. By the end of the week, whispers turned into rumors, and rumors into email subject lines nobody dared open at work. Subject: temporary reassignment of departmental oversight from Office of the COO to Virexa Global Staff effective immediately. Darren Cray will be taking an indefinite leave of absence pending internal review. All department operations will be overseen by interim leadership until further notice. There it was. Clean. Polished. Corporate language for we found out everything, and now we're containing the fallout. I reread the email 6 times. My fingers trembled as I placed my phone down on the cafe table. I didn't cheer. I didn't smile. I just exhaled, like I'd been holding my breath for months. But I knew one thing for sure: this wasn't justice. It was damage control. And I wasn't done. Darren hadn't just harassed a few employees. He had torched careers. Destroyed confidence. Gotten people, me, fired. The board could shuffle names and call it a resolution, but people like him always landed on their feet unless someone made sure they didn't. That someone was going to be me. While Virexa launched its internal investigation, I shifted my focus to something far more permanent: his reputation. Not with the company, but with the clients. Because that's where he was most vulnerable. Darren had always liked being the front man. Clients knew him, trusted him. But what they didn't know was how many lies were baked into those glossy presentations: fabricated metrics, fudged deadlines, pressure-cooked testimonials. So I made a list of every client I had personally handled during my time at Virexa, especially the ones Darren took credit for. I reached out one by one, cautiously but directly. I didn't slander him. I didn't vent. I simply asked if they were aware that the person they trusted with their accounts had since been placed on administrative leave for unethical managerial conduct. The responses were mixed at first. Some thanked me for the heads up. Others were skeptical. But a few asked the most important question of all: do you know anyone we could work with instead? That's when the real idea hit me. Why go back to Virexa when I could become their competition? I called Lisa first. Ever think about freelancing? I asked. She laughed. Only every day. How about co-founding? She didn't answer right away. Then, you're serious? Completely. I've got client contacts. You've got design brilliance. Tom's tired of being yelled at for using semicolons in the wrong font. Let's give people a real choice. Within 2 weeks, we were deep into planning. We registered a business name, Lightforge Creative, and started designing a modest but sharp website. Jake helped us write a pitch deck in his spare time. I built a small client outreach list using people who had already expressed doubt about staying with Virexa. Meanwhile, the dominoes inside Darren's old empire kept falling. Lisa messaged me one night: they suspended 2 senior managers. HR is being audited. People are saying the board might clear house. Then another message, days later: it's official. Darren's been terminated for cause. They're not even letting him do a farewell. No severance. No bonus. No redemption tour. Just gone. I sat in my living room in silence. I wanted to feel triumphant, but what I felt was something deeper. I remembered the nights I stayed late to cover for teammates. The weekends I worked through migraines. The day I walked out with my box of things, humiliated and discarded. Now, I was the one rebuilding. But not out of spite. Out of principle. 3 weeks later, Lightforge Creative launched with our first 2 clients, both former Virexa partners. Within a month, we had a full project pipeline, and within 3, we'd pulled 6 accounts from under Virexa's nose. And we did it without shouting. Without lawsuits. Without revenge tweets or exposés. We just showed people what ethical, empowering leadership looked like. And that? That was the real revenge. 6 months after Darren Cray was fired and Lightforge Creative was fully operational, I had no intention of ever seeing him again. Not because I feared him, but because he simply didn't matter anymore. We had built something real. Something people wanted to be a part of. Lisa was thriving as head of creative. Tom led strategy and analytics. Jake eventually left Virexa too. He now ran operations for us and brought in 2 more clients from his old contacts. We hired our first intern last week. Her name was Sienna, and when I overheard her say, "This is the first job I've ever loved," I almost cried. But fate, as always, had its own agenda. I ran into Darren in the most ironic place possible, a networking mixer hosted by the local Chamber of Commerce. I had gone reluctantly, mostly to support Tom, who was giving a talk on ethical marketing. The crowd was a mix of executives, founders, and startup hopefuls, polished and fake, laughing over cocktails. And then, standing alone by the charcuterie table, was Darren Cray. He looked diminished. The confidence he once wore like armor had cracked. His suit was still sharp, but the man inside it wasn't. His eyes darted quickly when he spotted me, but he didn't look away. Instead, he straightened his back and walked toward me. "Elira," he said, voice calm. "Didn't expect to see you here." I smiled politely. Life's full of surprises. There was a pause. He was waiting for me to blink first. Apologize. Justify. React. I didn't give him the satisfaction. "I heard you're running your own agency now," he said finally. "Congratulations." "Thank you," I said. "We've got 6 full-time clients. Ethical contracts. No unpaid overtime. Radical, right?" His jaw tightened slightly. "I always knew you had potential," he said. "But what you did was calculated. You humiliated me." "No," I said, stepping forward slightly. "You humiliated yourself. I just stopped covering for you." His nostrils flared, but he forced a smile. "You won. Enjoy it." And then he turned to leave. But I wasn't done. "Darren." He paused. "I didn't do this to win. I did it because people like you get away with it too often. I did it for every intern you screamed at. For every woman you talked over in meetings. For every burned-out employee you discarded like trash." I walked up to him, lowered my voice. "And the difference between us?" I said. "You built your career stepping on people. I'm building mine by lifting them up. That's why you fell. And why we'll keep rising." He didn't respond. Just stood there, jaw tight, shoulders hunched, like someone who had finally realized the world no longer feared him. He left shortly after. I walked back to my table. Tom handed me a drink. "You okay?" "Perfect," I said. "Let's talk about next quarter's expansion. Because that's what real power is. Not yelling. Not threatening. Not dominating. It's knowing you don't need revenge to win. You just need to lead better."